Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 122. Clocking them right along. I'll tell you what, we'll be at our third year here in just a quick second if we're at the rate we're going. And want to remind everyone to be sure and share where you're joining from. And we always love to hear your comments and your questions as we go throughout the episode. And without any further ado, welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you with us this morning. Appreciate you being here. So, Anton, you want to introduce our topic today?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Always grateful for you spending time with us. Remember to let us know where you're joining from. Kev will give you a shout out. He's very good at that. Today, we're talking about empathetic leadership. It's something that's leadership is one of the pillars that human SOS is all about, right? With human SOS stands for humanly sustainable operating system. And it has three pillars. It has health, it has life, and work/leadership is the last one. So we haven't touched on it for a while. We want to make sure we touch it today. There was some comments made last episode that wanted us to discuss leadership. So we're going to be talking about empathetic leadership. It's a very needed topic. I think that we are constantly stressed. We're constantly struggling. Stress is high. Pressure's high, and leaders have to learn how to be empathetic, whether that be from just day-to-day activities and helping people to manage their schedules, whether it be from development and understanding that people want to grow, people want to be better, but at the same time, like meeting them where they are. That's going to be the topic that we're going to be discussing. Kev, I'll ask you first. Why do you think it's important to have empathetic leadership?
Uh, First, let me give a couple of shout outs. Hawk, glad to see you. Been a while. Lydia, good morning. Glad to have you with us as well. Uh, the importance of having empathetic leadership is that in order to lead people effectively, they need to know that we understand the challenges that they face, and empathy helps us do that. And uh, and one of the things I've always thought about is that we want empathetic leadership, not sympathetic leadership. Difference and an important difference there. Empathetic means that we can understand and appreciate what someone's dealing with, and we can actually identify with it. But we, as a leader, in our empathy, we have to be able to approach it logically. And when we get into sympathetic, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to be able to remain somewhat emotionally removed in that we need to be able to address the needs of the people that we're leading and the needs of the situation. But what we have, I think the one way to understand what we need is to understand what we don't need, and that is leadership that has absolutely no concern about the people that they are leading and what those people are going through and dealing with, and just hand out dictates and directives that uh, have no consideration for those people. So, uh, without empathetic leadership, it's hard to get people inspired or motivated or influenced to do what we want them to do. And then, of course, one of the things that I hold as an opinion and will hold for likely the rest of my days is that real leadership is servant leadership, and a byproduct of servant leadership is empathy. That's the hallmark of the servant leaders that we've seen throughout history, is that what they do is not in the absence of understanding and identification with the people that follow them.
Kevin,
Welcome
I got another. Oh, go
also
ahead.
Shanur. Welcome, Shanur. Glad to have you with us. Sorry about that, Anton. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no worries, no worries. They're more important than I am. Give them shout outs. They came to spending time with us early in the morning or whatever time of the day it is. Um, Kevin, let me ask you this, right? Can we be a servant leader if we're struggling with empathy, right? Like if we're putting all the effort into developing our people, if we're putting all the effort in giving people what they're asking for, but we struggle with connecting to our own emotions. I think it's tough to be empathetic if you struggle connecting to your emotions. So I'm saying, like, can we still check the box of being a caring leader and a servant leader if we're have every intention of serving our people and giving them what they need, but we just lack that emotional muscle? Do you think we can still succeed?
I think on some level, because part of any of the what we do are choices, and we always talk about balance. We've got to be able to make the choices at times, and even at moments to the not detriment, but not taking into account emotion. Depends on the circumstance, what's going on. But I would challenge whether that is sustainable over time. I think in moments and brief moments in time that we can make those choices and it will be okay. But in order to work with people empathetically, we have to appreciate the value of empathy by understanding our own needs for empathy. And besides that, to not be working with our own emotions in a healthy fashion creates a whole nother set of problems. Again, a good leader can work through those times because we have to. Because as a leader, we're not always completely where we need to be. We haven't arrived. And so there are moments where we have to choose to work through it, even though we're struggling ourselves. But it's not sustainable over a long period of time.
Yeah.
In order to approach it in a healthy fashion, we've got to be healthy in our own mental emotional state uh, to be effective. And part of servant leadership, and this is uh, where we get into maybe some of the details, is that servant leader is chooses to be humble, and that humility causes us to take the focus off ourselves and onto others, and that's a good approach. One of the keys, though, that we have to watch for is that when we take that focus off ourselves onto others, that we have to keep the balance of self-care, and that means being healthy mentally and emotionally ourselves. So to answer your question, can it be done? I believe it can be and has to be at moments, but it's not a sustainable way to approach it. If we're not mentally and emotionally healthy ourselves, doesn't mean we're perfect, but it means we're at least dealing with our own struggles, our own emotions, and working through them as well. So one of the key differences, we're not, if we've got to wait till we're perfect in something, we just might as well close up shop and go on and move ahead.
No, that makes sense.
Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you with us this morning. Let's see. I thought we had a comment here.
Yeah,
No, just greetings among our.
I got you.
Here we
I
go.
got
Here's Hawk had a comment. I have trained a self-diagnosed psychopath in empathy. It worked. It's interesting.
So if a self-diagnosed psychopath can learn, I can learn too, Kevin. I have hope.
There you go. Gives me hope too. I don't think I'm that extreme.
Not on that level, but I asked that, and it's something that I've personally dealt with a lot over my life, right? Like I grew up in Ukraine. I grew up in the Soviet Ukraine. Back when things were even more grim than they probably are now. Uh,
Hmm.
from a people standpoint, obviously
Right.
things are bad the way they are now. And emotion was just not something we did back there, right? Like even from a very early age, we were told to just bottle it up, push it down, deal with it. Older people drink some vodka to deal with it. Younger people just have to deal with it.
Right.
uh, and it's really hard for me to be empathetic sometimes. And the reason I struggle with it is not just because I don't want to, see how those people are feeling. It's just they talk about empathy, put yourself into those other people's shoes. Well, when I do that, I respond extremely different how most people would respond because of my upbringing. So it's
Hmm.
really like I've learned over time, it's not enough for me to put myself into those people's shoes. I have to really understand those people in their own shoes, right?
Right.
That's a very, very different approach for me because it's very like almost like a deductive reasoning. Like it's weird. I approach emotions sometimes from a very logical standpoint because I'm like, here's all the things I know about them. Here's the situation I've seen them react to and how they've been. And I'm like, all right, how would this situation make them feel? And really taking all the things I've known about them and putting this picture together. It's a very different approach, but that's what I've had to do because it's not natural for me to be very emotional at certain times.
Well, one of the things, and I know I'm getting going to get out one of the drums I beat so regularly, but part of the value of seeking out wisdom is to help with all of this, because when we seek wisdom in relationships and what we do in our life, it gives us a better perspective. Such as, one of the areas, and we have talked about this, that I struggle with is I'm generally a pretty patient guy, pretty easygoing. But when I get in the car, and especially in Atlanta traffic, I am not so easygoing or patient. And as I continue to seek wisdom in regards to what I'm experiencing, it causes me to back up and realize that we have understanding that, first of all, one of my reactions is because I feel like somebody's doing that just to irritate me, whatever it is in driving. When I really step back and look at it from God's eyes, from a bigger perspective, I realize chances are no, they really aren't trying to do that. It may be thoughtless, but not intentional. And once I start looking at it wisely in that situation, it helps with new context. And as a result of the context, like you were talking about, understanding the people and where they are, not just our understanding of where they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And wisdom helps us do that, because wisdom helps us get outside of ourselves as we view people, life, circumstances. And that's important, because when we can get outside of ourselves, we have a better chance of responding well or better. And I think it helps us to be more empathetic because we can appreciate what they are going through from a different angle.
That makes sense. We got a comment here from Rick. Being a leader is like walking on glass or juggling hand grenades, not an easy task. Yeah, I know it really can be like that, but I think that some people make it look so effortless.
Yeah,
Like I think for me it's probably like that, but I've watched some people and they're just natural, and I think that the leaders that are more natural at it or seem more natural at it have these soft skills down. They're empathetic, they understand people, they're just
right,
able to connect to people in a very deep level. And I think that when you have that level of connection, everything else becomes easier. You're
right.
given grace instead of like, if you don't have that connection with people because you're not empathetic, they don't think that you get them, you don't connect with them, they're gonna nitpick at every little thing that you do, right?
Yes,
They're gonna watch you under a microscope. But when you have that connection, they're gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. So even if you're not perfect at times, even if you make small mistakes, it's just gonna seem like nothing happened because they're like, oh, it's no big deal, it's having a bad day, or no big deal, it was just a mistake. Versus like, oh, I can't believe they did that. So yeah, I definitely agree because I've been there and I felt like that. But there's those folks who could just, how does it, flow like a butterfly, sting like a bee? Like they're just
hmm,
grateful.
yeah. Well, and part of what is interesting, and this is an ongoing discussion among people that talk about leadership. Is leadership a something that we're born with, or is it something that is determined by training and environment? I think it's both. I think that people are born with certain traits that lend themselves to being leaders and make it seem easier. For example, patience. Uh, when I'm not in the car, have to give the caveat there. Patience is something that is a strong suit for me, and I wish I could say I developed it and all that. It's been a natural trait that I've been blessed with. Short fuse, I'm sorry, not short fuse, long fuse, and things like that, and it helps in those circumstances. And so some people are born more empathetic than others. And part of that is a birth trait. And as you've mentioned, though, some of it also has to do with your environment, what you grew up in. Those are factors. And the key is, as a leader, that we become aware of those components, those questions, and we address them. I think that's part of the problem. We've got a lot of leaders that don't look at the need for them to grow in their leadership. And if you're not growing as a leader, it's hard to help others follow and to help them grow. I mean, part of what we wanted to talk about is development. Well, if we're not willing to develop and grow, we're going to have a hard time helping others develop and grow. And so, like Hawk said, sometimes it's like walking on glass or juggling hand grenades. And even for those that are naturally good at it, there are moments where it's like that. It's the nature of the situation.
It's interesting you're talking about, nature versus nurture. I wish I had billions of dollars to do all the research that like I would want to do.
Yeah,
Uh, I believe a lot of the nature part comes from
right,
our hormonal balance, right? It's what, some men, some women are born with more testosterone than their counterparts, and some born with more estrogen than their counterparts.
okay,
And
yeah,
I think when we have more testosterone, this is a hypothesis, when we have more testosterone naturally, not just in male in comparison to female, it's one male against another male, or one female versus another female. You're going to be more dominant, command and control kind of leadership. I think
right,
it's more like, let's go, I'm confident, let's do this. And you just show that confidence that makes people want to say, okay, they got it figured out, I'm just going to follow them. On the other side, I think people that have more estrogen are more in tune with their emotion. I think those are the people that are more empathetic. And for example, like there is research that talks about men after they've had kids, especially girls, their testosterone levels go down in order to make a balance between testosterone and estrogen a little bit more even. It's not going to get even in men, but to be a little bit more on that side, just to have them be more empathetic, have them be more connected to their emotions and stuff like that. So I would love to do like some research on that and see
hmm,
how much of that plays a factor. Because for me, like, even though I grew up in a very tough environment with my dad that was just very tough kind of guy, um, I have more estrogen than most, the guys in comparison to me should have. So like I can be more emotional, and thank God for that, because I can't imagine myself was super testosterone dominant being raised the way that I was raised. So like
right.
it's an interesting concept to think about.
It's it is, and I think that part of what we have to understand is that as we age, our body changes, and we have to make adjustments accordingly with our body and our body chemistry. I mean, our hormonal levels up and down and all over, and so we have to be adjusting. That's why, if you're going to be a leader, understand that it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for anyone looking to coast. Leaders, that's not a healthy combination. If you're a leader and you're trying to get to a point where you can coast along, you're headed for trouble in a big way, and it's very clear that that's the case. And we've seen what happens with that in some of the more infamous leaders. They think they get themselves established, and then all they've got to do is coast along. And ultimately, they go from being a leader to a tyrant, and it becomes a real issue. And let's see, Rick makes a comment. And he says, leading others will make you appreciate what Jesus was dealing with during his time on earth. Yes. And, Jesus is an example of an empathetic leader. We see examples throughout his time on earth, his ministry, and we saw him struggle in just a lot of ways, but he continued with following his vision from the Father and made choices relative to his followers, even beyond his time here, to prepare them beyond that, which is part of, again, a leader trait. We're always preparing anyone that we have following us to step up and be a leader or be an excellent follower as well. So definitely he's a good example.
And that brings me to a point about empathetic leadership, right? Empathetic leadership, just because you understand how somebody feels, doesn't mean that you're going to act in a way that they want you to act, right? Like,
That is true.
not always what we're feeling is the best thing for us. And Jesus is a great example of that, right? He did the right thing. He didn't care about hurting feelings sometimes, because that's what needed to be done. And sometimes people may, we talk about development and things like that. People get comfortable. They don't want to, their feeling is fear. Their feeling is anxiety when something new is being thrown at them, when they're being put into an uncomfortable situation. Being a good empathetic leader doesn't mean that I'm going to let you not do what you need to do to grow. It just means that I'm going to feel and help you understand, I'm going to understand what you're going through and what you're feeling and show you support through it. But I still might be tough and continue to encourage you to go into that situation, or sometimes maybe, help you, walk with you, but I'm still going to make sure that you're going to go through that temporary pain, because that's the best thing for you. Right. And I think in our society today, I'm seeing a lot of people talk about empathetic leadership, but they avoid putting people into those spots because, like, well, that makes them anxious, that makes them uncomfortable, and but that makes them grow. So it's about having that good balance of, like, okay, maybe today is not the day because of what you're going through, but tomorrow we are going to tackle that task or tackle that development, whatever it may be.
Well, and one of the things that I think is a problem for us is how we have come to define what love is and what compassion is. And I think we have a misunderstanding of those concepts, because real love at times says, I hate that you're suffering, but you need to suffer through this situation to grow. I think one of the key elements, and this is where we get into a real challenge, is that if we are behaving in a loving fashion, we don't we allow that situation to continue. The difference is that we're available to walk through it with the person. And that's where a servant leader comes in, is that they may not intervene in terms of suffering or struggle, but they're there to help them walk through it and overcome it. And that's a key piece as a leader that we've got to make sure that we're aware of and tuned into, because that's where we build those relationships and connections that help folks understand that we are empathetic. To just say, tough, get over it, you got to go through it, and nothing more, I would question the empathy involved. But if you say, hey, I know you're going through this, and by the way, you really need to go through this, but I'm going to walk through it with you, then you have chosen to be empathetic. Even in those cases, you may not be emotionally uh, in depth involved in it, but you're recognizing the struggle and that you're willing to give of yourself to go through it with them. And I think that's so important. So often it's either we get up to our eyeballs into it or we are completely disconnected from it, when there's some middle ground there where we can be engaged, but still not get so caught up in the emotional aspect that we can't make rational, good decisions and be able to be what that person needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, of course. And to me, I'm listening to you talk and it just the visual popped into mind. There's two sides to this, right? Oftentimes, emotional is going to be more near term.
Right.
Logical is going to be more long term. And as leaders, while being empathetic, we have to kind of look at that both directionally, right? What if I'm going to make the decision or and help you or decide something for you as a leader, I need to be thinking about at what cost, right? If I'm going to let you avoid this short-term pain, at what cost is this going to come in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or vice versa, if I'm going to push you for this long-term gain, at what cost is that going to come short term?
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure that neither one of those is on the extreme, because sometimes a decision we would make for most, an individual circumstance would make us do a different decision for that person. That's what to me is true empathy is being able to adjust to each individual case by case instead of just thinking like in broad strokes and making everybody do the same thing or thinking about everybody in the same way. So that's something that I think we need to continue to get better as leaders and look at the complete picture of a human being. You may be doing ruinous empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always focusing on the short term and avoiding short term pain, but in the long run, you're hurting them a lot more.
Yes, definitely. And again, I know I'm banging my drum again, but that's the value of wisdom. The value of wisdom is that it causes us to look and see not just the moment we're in. We should have as crystal clear understanding and experience in the moment, but we also have to look and see down the road a longer period of time. And if we don't have that context, we will tend to stray out of balance one way or another. More overly empathetic or overly, um, I don't know, what's the word? Cold,
What's
I guess.
what's the opposite of empathetic?
Yeah,
Just it's logical, right? It's just all logic driven.
pure logic. Okay. Yeah.
You're basing everything on facts and things versus feelings, right? I don't know,
Right.
whatever that may the word
Right.
is. That's ultimately what it is, right?
Right. Let's see. We've got some comments we wanted to throw out there that Rick was saying sometimes you got to go against the wishes of the crowd or even some of the individuals, and that's hard. But one of the keys is our motivation. And when we demonstrate that our motivation is based in love, and I know some people say, oh, you're getting mushy and gooey. And no, the love that I refer to is can be mushy and gooey and all that, but it can be at times very strong and very powerful as well, because it is about the ultimate good for those that we're looking at, not our own good, their good. Um,
And I would add communication of that love, right?
of
Like
course,
if
sure.
you and that guys, this is something I've struggled with. So this episode like is things that I've had to work with a lot myself. And a lot of times I would make decisions from love, from that standpoint, but I wouldn't communicate it clearly. I would just do it and not sit a person down and say, "Look, I get what you're going through. I
Right,
understand the uncomfort. I understand the anxiety, whatever it may be, but I'm doing this for XYZ reasons." Right? Like I'd get too busy, I'd run around doing a million things and I forget to have that conversation. And that makes things a lot worse. people understand that they're not always going to get their way, but they want to feel that they were heard, that the people that I understand where they're coming from, and that I got their back. So irrelevant of what the decision is, we need to make sure those other boxes are ticked.
Well, and boy, I think we're going to cover all kind of ground this morning. But as a leader, developing an understanding of communication of love. And you get into looking at love languages, because how we communicate or how we receive love and the communication of love may not, no, it's not a may not. It some quite often is not the same as others. And as a result, if we don't communicate, and especially if we don't communicate in the language that that person understands, not only do we not do good, sometimes we end up doing harm without meaning to. And so, let's see, one of the things I tell leaders when I train them, by the way, leadership's not easy. It's not for the faint hearted. As I guess it was Rick's talking about juggling grenades and walking on glass. That's the challenge of being a leader. That's why not everyone wants to be or should be a leader, because it carries a lot of responsibility. And all of these different components are part of that responsibility for a leader. Let's see. Do you know HSP trait, Anton?
No, I was reading that. There's a couple things that Hawk said that I'm like, oh, I need to go look this up. Our
Yeah,
audience educates us as much as we educate them.
there you go. I'm always learning, definitely. So, Hawk, maybe you may need to share a little more about that. Help us learn along the way. I suspect that what you say is true because of what I know of you, but and Hawk talks about the what we experience as we grow in our family and our relationships. Yes, when I have my first granddaughter has come along, and it has affected how I perceive and proceed. Let's see. Hawk also makes comment, definitely interesting. If you balance these hormones with a healthy level of dopamine and corticotropin, that one, I don't know that one. Do you know that one?
That's the second one I didn't. That's the second thing.
It should make for a better leader. Happiness helps. I think the key message there is that, and this is part of what we talk about as Human SOS, is that we've got to be healthy in a balanced way, and that includes the physical and all, and emotional, mental, and spiritual. Let's see here. Sharon makes comment. Many years ago, I worked with a group of people who were hardworking people from another country. The managers would scream, yell, and humiliate people in front of everyone. Stepped up and had to say something. I reminded the manager that in the USA, if you have to reprimand someone, don't do it in front of everyone. Take that person in a private room and talk to them alone. Don't do this in front of the entire group. That is a sound piece of leadership advice, and that when we we celebrate people's victories publicly, and we deal with people's failures privately, and that's always the way a leader needs to approach things. Always, it is a rare moment where public humiliation or anything like that's appropriate. Very rare, and I've even had situations where I thought it would be appropriate at a time, and still found out it was not the right way to go about it. So definitely keep that in mind. Welcome. Oh my goodness, Alja. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. I appreciate you being here. And so, part of what we're talking about is related to, and a part of empathy is understanding that each of the people that we work with that follow us need to be developed. And if we're truly empathetic, we recognize that, we're aware of that. In fact, we see those people, if we made the effort to be empathetic, we see their strengths, we see their weaknesses, we see how they struggle and things like that. And as a result, part of what we're going to do is have a desire to help them develop and grow. And I know that gets into another whole nother challenging debate. Do we grow in our strengths or do we grow in our weaknesses or both? And that, I don't know that I've got an easy answer on that one. I think that's where we pray a lot and seek a lot of wisdom to know how to respond to that. So, empathy. What do you think, Anton? How do we take empathy and go into development of people using empathy?
You know, it's God, I just had the famous Mark Twain quote, or one of them, but he talks about, "I'm all for progress. I'm just afraid of change." I'm I'm paraphrasing. Um, and that's where some people struggle with development, right? They're afraid of changing. They're afraid of being put on the spot to show that they're not good at something, right?
Mm,
Like, a lot of time development comes due to process changes, due to, the company going in a different direction and things like that. And people are not opposed to improving the way they work. They're opposed to having to go through the training and being felt uncomfortable. Just need to remember that, right? I was
right.
going through some change management training yesterday, and this person was talking about why people resist change, why people resist development, why people resist training, sometimes changing, those kind of things. And she's like, it's that fear of screwing up. It's that
Mm-hmm.
fear of being made to look like they're inadequate. And she just had us sit down and write left-handed upside down. Right. She wrote a term and then said, now write this left-handed upside down. And she made us really think about what we felt during that moment,
Mm-hmm.
how all the frustrations came up. And she's like, now share with the group what you wrote. And all of a sudden it's like this fear like just jumped up. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. Like, I was okay doodling and trying that until I had to show it to others and comparing myself in my weakness. So the tie there with empathy and development is that we have to remember that that's how many people are feeling, especially those that may have been doing this for a long time, right? Whatever the thing that they're doing that they're going to be developed into doing differently, or better, they may have been the masters. And now
Mm-hmm.
you're leveling the playing field, and everybody has to learn at the same time this new process. You've taken away also a little bit, not just of their comfort and expertise, but you've taken away a feeling of mastery that they got to enjoy for a long time. And just understanding all those things when you're putting people through development is very, very important, because how you handle the conversations and how to handle your approach for development is going to be very different based on that.
Definitely. And I think a lot of that is based in the fact that so many of us, are not secure in who we are as a person. And part of the value of empathy, and when we choose to be empathetic with our team, our team members, followers, whatever term you want to use, is that we make it clear that when they fail, make a mistake, whatever term, that their value as a person and as a part of the team has not diminished in any fashion. And the more confident that our team members can be in that, the more willing they're going to be to risk change and risk learning and risk being vulnerable. Because most of us, our reaction, when you get down to the root of it, when we're defensive with other people, when we are afraid of change, a lot of it's driven by the fear that our value as a person will become in question. And I continue again to beat this drum. Our value is not established by what we do. Our value is not established by what people say. Our value is established by our Creator, and it can't be changed. We can't mess up enough to destroy our value. And we people can't say enough to destroy our value. Our value is intrinsic by being human and created by God. And the more we can help ourselves and to build that kind of culture around our team, the sooner that people are going to be willing to grow and change because it doesn't threaten them as a human being, and realize that we're all in this together. And when we blow it, our value is still the same. And as a leader, that's part of what we really uh, have to consider. And as one of the group dynamic pieces, as I teach leadership to people, is a sense of security. You can make people feel wonderful and warm and happy and things like that. But until you, as a leader, help build a secure environment for them, which means that their values not threatened, and that in addition, the expectations you have with them are clear, and it's clear what those expectations are for the whole team, then you get into having a secure environment. And when people are in a secure environment, they're more open to learning, growing, changing in those pieces. And it's a challenge to develop that environment and culture.
I think part of the problem with value is that we tend to over-index on one or two things, right? We
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is we've been successful with, or whatever we've gotten accolades for, whatever it is, recognition, we tend to make that be all of everything that we perceive ourselves to be. And I think that how we tie this back into leadership is really learning to praise people for different things,
Mm-hmm.
right? They may not be the best on the team at something, but they're showing growth, or they've played a role in somebody else being the best at it. Whatever it is, the more broader we help people to see their value, the easier it is for them to be developed in any, because you're not messing with their golden goose. You're not messing with just the one thing that they feel like they got going for them. If you're having to change something in that area, they're like, well, you know what? It's okay if I go through this because I have value in all of these other areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have, you know, whether it be God, whether it be something else, it doesn't matter. But the broader the picture people see of their value, the easier time they're going to have adjusting any one of those things. That can come from taking criticism and feedback. It can come from development. It can come from change. It doesn't matter. It's all going to be done easier when they have that broad picture of value.
And one of the things that I've learned as I have researched and studied workforce, and this is something that we all need to understand, 99%, and I give that 1% because never and always, those are dangerous terms. 99% of people that we deal with are coming from a place of feeling like losers. And that has occurred for a number of reasons. One of which, and I'm going to get on my soapbox on another topic, but education. Our education system labels most everyone in one way or another somehow a loser. And when we keep that in mind as we deal with our team members, our followers, we begin to consider, okay, I'm not starting with someone that's in a solid place in all regard and confident and secure in who they are. Most of the time, I'm dealing with people that are in deficit. And when we begin to address that deficit in those people's lives, we have a better foundation then to help them in other areas. That's why, like you were saying, Anton, they do something good in another area, another way, be sure and communicate it and recognize it, because most of us are deficit in terms of feeling like we are accomplished or that we are valued. And so that one of the easiest ways to help build security and a better place for followers is simply saying, good job. We want to make this thing so complicated. Quite often it is not that complicated, but we have to choose to demonstrate leadership, including empathetic leadership with our folks. And when we build that security in our culture as a leader, then we find that a lot of these other issues become secondary, and they make it, I don't like to say make it easier, because it's not easy being a leader. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Now, on the balance side of that, it's also one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do as well. It's like children. Children are our greatest challenge and our greatest blessing, all in one nice package. And the same way with dealing with followers as a leader.
I see a comment from Hawk says that I haven't seen Dr. Sabrina Jasmine here. She would probably have some awesome insights into the hormones and homeostasis. Either one of you want to invite her on the show, and we'd love to have that conversation. Hawk, maybe it could be a group discussion. I know you got a lot of experience in that area, so maybe we can set up a show where both of you guys come on and we have some of that discussion. I understand some of that stuff myself a little bit. So if you're interested, message Kev, let him know, let's set it up. And then I think it's going to be a little bit of a different conversation. I think it's going to be not the common knowledge that sometimes we discuss, but it's very important. I'd love to have it.
Sure, definitely. And Dr. Jesmond has been on the show quite a number of times. And I think one of the challenges is she is in Japan, and it's a timing issue. But maybe we could arrange it. I think it would be good, especially with Anton, with the knowledge you bring, and then add Hawk and Dr. Jesmond in terms of discussion on what's going on in us physiologically could be very insightful. And so we'll definitely pursue that.
And that comes back to the importance of how we are, right? A lot of times we talk about what we are, why we are, those kind of things. But part of human SOS, and really, I think maybe at the core of human SOS, is the state of being that we're in, right? From every sense of the word, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, right? And our hormones and our neurotransmitters is a big part of that. So I think that would be definitely fitting for our brand and the conversation we want to have.
And let's see. And Lydia makes a comment, and it's true that the reason that we need more times than not to provide encouragement versus correction is because of the condition that many are in, that we are in a deficit place, no doubt about it.
And that comes back to empathy too, right? If you see somebody is struggling, right, you're feeling that in their shoes, whatever it may be, like find little steps of progress and create that encouragement. They may need extra compared to somebody else that's doing fine. Their confidence is good. They're not struggling mental health, whatever that may be. Like if their state of being is good, they probably don't need as much. I'm not saying don't do it. But if somebody's state of being is not where it wants to be, that encouragement is really going to go a long way. And it takes practice to notice those things. It takes, being grounded as a leader to pick up on small things, not just big accomplishments.
Yes. And that includes our own journey with dealing with our own emotional issues. It is one of the most profound times and defining moments in my life as a leader. Go back to facing some of my own emotional garbage that I had to deal with. And up until that point, it affected me and my relationships and what I could or couldn't do as a leader in a lot of ways. So one of the things that as an effective leader, you need to be showing yourself some empathy in a sort of way. I tell people, sometimes we make a mistake in that we're servant leaders for everybody else, but we're tyrants to ourselves. And we got to stop that. we need those same principles applied by us to us, not just to others, in order to become an effective functioning leader in most regards. Lydia, let's see. Uh, Lydia makes the following comment, and that is that especially those who are not aware of their self-worth and values. And that's why I go back that encouragement and empathy is rarely out of place, because so many people are struggling with who they are, what they are, their value. And as a society, we unfortunately have built culturally into place things that are more about discouraging and identifying lack of worth versus the other way around. And so, as an effective leader, most of the time, we're going to need to be uh, tending towards the understanding, the empathetic, the encouraging, because that's what most need. There's an occasional that needs the other balance of the harsh truth, what radical candor. There are moments, but a lot of people need that encouragement because of the nature of our society and our culture and where we are.
Well, we're
And
talking about right now, Kev, with encouragement. It's that step beyond empathy, right? It's one thing to
right,
understand how you feel. Like but I have to, as a leader, be able to do something with it. Like, don't
yes,
get me wrong, it's great to have that first step, but if all you do is feel what other people feel without adjusting your methods, without adjusting what you do, that's not going to get you very far. The whole point of being empathetic is to change based on the individual how you lead them. And that may require more encouragement. At the same time, that may require more accountability. But that's where the leader has to get skilled. It's something that I don't think is natural, right? I think that some people may be empathetic naturally, but being able to change something after that requires coaching, development, experience, practice, you name it, all those more build skills.
well, and the key there is what you mentioned earlier, communication. One of the things I struggle with at times, I am one of the more caring, concerned people out there. But I realize that at times, especially with different relationships, and I think it's about taking for granted, that I forget to communicate. And yes, we can communicate with our actions, but that's never a reason not to communicate it verbally and provide this detail, to provide background and all that. And it's easy to get caught up in being about it and even trying to demonstrate it, but it is important that we always communicate it. Don't assume that our actions are being interpreted the way we think they are. We need to communicate effectively. One of the reasons that a good leader will learn and always be working on improving communication. And that's a pretty tough subject, because part of that is learning how to communicate in all regards, verbal, nonverbal, deeper in terms of even emotional and spiritual and all those, and then learning to be an effective listener, learning communication styles. I mean, it's a real challenge that any leader does well to really focus in on as a leader. So key to what we need to do, and that includes communicating empathy. And it just, like you said, Anton, we can feel it and acknowledge it and think it all we want, but until we communicate it and act on it, it's likely ineffective. Such a key piece.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see here. I want to make sure I don't miss any uh, comments. Noticed that Hawk made a comment earlier. Research a few years back showed that praising improvement in kids caused improvement. Praising their intelligence caused stagnation. Yes, um, It's really funny. Something you said earlier, Anton, I think is really important, is we get cued into things that are especially culturally that become defining single items, such as wealth. We seem to cue in, well, if you got a lot of money, you got it made.
Mhm.
No, some of the most miserable people, unhealthy people, have more money than they could ever use. So cueing in on these single items that somehow cause us to have arrived in what we need to do is dangerous. Having that prestigious job, oh yeah, I'm the CEO of whatever. And if that becomes our definition of ourselves, we got a problem because those things change. And if they change, it'll devastate us. That's why we see a lot of men, especially, that allow their value, their identity to be wrapped up in their work, and they lose their job and they become completely despondent to a point of losing themselves and even getting desperate. And one that's out there now is education attainment. Getting in, we watch young people now that higher rates of suicide among young people. And it's because we have done this in the area of education. Oh, well, if you're successful, you're going to get into this prestigious school, or you're going to have this test score level, ACT, SAT, those kinds of things. And defining people by those things is so unhealthy. And so, as a leader, not allowing someone to think their value only exists because they are master of spreadsheets, or their value has to be beyond that in order to be healthy and to maintain their value in those regards, because at some point the spreadsheet will get corrupted, or you won't make the score or whatever, and at that point, if it devastates you as a person, you got a big problem. I mean, we're talking to the core type problem. So empathetic leadership, big topic, important topic, starting with understanding it and digging into learning about what it is to be an empathetic leader, and then figuring out how to show and communicate and take action on the empathy. Final thoughts, Anton?
You know, if you're like me and you struggle with empathy, it's just you're not you can't it's not something you can easily learn, but you can learn. And
Yes.
you, like I was saying, you can even use logic to understand and be more empathetic to
Mm-hmm.
people by just paying attention to small cues and things like that. But even if you struggle with that, there's people around you who are empathetic. Get an advisor, right? Somebody that can be around and help you to see how other people's are, how the people are responding, how they're feeling, and things like that. But one way or another, you have to be able to understand people in their own shoes and how they're responding, how they're reacting as a leader. Otherwise, you can have every single positive intention, but you're going to be only a fraction of a possible effectiveness that you should have.
Well, and it occurs to me, one of the values of team is, if you're, as a leader, if you're not the most empathetic naturally, it may be that, at least for a time, that someone on your team becomes that for you. That becomes a role that they fill, and that gives them the opportunity to demonstrate a strength of theirs and complement your weakness. And so, even if you're not great at empathy, you may choose to be empathetic by finding someone on your team that's better at it than you are, and give them the authority, the empowerment to act on your behalf as part of what they do. So it is important. Empathy, empathy as a leader. And
I saw Hawk already sent out an email to Dr. Jasmine about potentially doing that. So hopefully we get it worked out. We'll let you know, folks. That'd be an interesting topic to talk about hormones and leadership.
and we're not opposed to having guests. In fact, at one point we used to have 4 of us regularly. Makes for good perspective. So sure, that would be great. We'll work out the details. So I hope today you found some value, and hope you sense some empathy as part of our show today. We understand where people are coming from. We struggle. One of the things we try to make it clear, we don't have it all figured out. We just share what we do understand in the hopes that we can all grow and learn together. So consider human SOS. Consider being healthy in a balanced fashion, and to manage your stressors and your life challenges on an effective level so that you can sustain. That's what we're about, is to help people be able to sustain and not just survive along the way. So hope that you will join us again next Tuesday. We'll be back. Who knows, we might have pulled together this team and be able to talk about in depth in some of the physiologic elements of being healthy. So just stay tuned. We'll always try to make it interesting, and we always appreciate you guys being here, because when you're here, the show is just so much better than just Anton and I sitting and giving our perspective on things. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next week, and have a blessed rest of the week in between. Take care. Bye, everyone.